this afternoon means a lot to us.
Absolutely. This is our second Hollywood Habesha. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we are a networking, mentorship, and discussion nonprofit that focuses on creatives in the Ethiopian and Eritrean community. And just started off as a one-off event at the Soho warehouse in August of last year. Just a general conversation about sustaining and protecting the culture now that the culture is becoming a lot more mainstream. We have The Weeknd out there singing Amharic. We have everybody repping the Eritrean flag because of Nipsey and, you know, references in media now. And now that it's becoming a lot more mainstream, it's about how do we protect it and how do we tell our own stories and narratives from our own perspectives. So it started off as a one-off conversation, but, you know, we were hearing from you guys that it needs to keep going, you know? So we turned it into a rolling series, and here we are now. We're covering film and TV, and it's going to continue. You know, we might do fashion, music, culinary arts, whatever it may be, but we're here to highlight you guys and all your great creativity. So.
You guys are. We're basically like curating you guys so that you guys can continue to connect and build horizontal networks alongside the vertical power structures. Especially because we are Black in America. We have to remember that everything that we contribute in the United States is going to be attached to that. And, you know, we come from a culture that has not been, it's contested, but it hasn't been culturally colonized. And so we have to understand the power of indigenous Black culture and keeping our authority on the voice. So I just wanted to add that.
Awesome. So for this event, it's called Carrying the Torch. It's a film and TV panel and discussion. We partnered with the Habesha Film Association, so we're going to have Dagmawi come up and tell us a bit about who they are.
Thank you so much for coming out today. Thank you, Dinky, and all the panelists, and for organizing this event. My name is Dagmawi. I came here 7 years ago for grad school, for film school, and when I was in grad school, I didn't really have any community like this where I could go and work with other Habeshas. There was 3 of us in the program, and so when we graduated, we all met at a film festival, and we said, hey, we didn't really know each other for 3 years, but we all lived here, so let's create like something that can connect everybody, like here, in Europe, back home, and then we decided to make this nonprofit that should encompass the whole Horn of Africa, not just Ethiopia, even though we have a lot of Ethiopians and Eritreans that come here first. So that's kind of how we started. We started 3 years ago, and we started building, having workshops and actors workshop and directing workshops, and we want to just keep building and really introducing people so you guys can take it and make your own projects after this. Thank you.
Also, I'd like to say thank you to the Black Image Center that is generously hosting us. So if you could give a round of applause for the Black Image Center.
Okay, so we're going to get the panel started. I want to quickly introduce everyone. We have Selome Haile, reporter at Variety. We have Leah Takele, associate creative director at Parkwood Entertainment, Beyonce's production company, if you guys don't know. And then we have Prince Yoel Makonnen, who is the co-founder of Old World New World, a production company based in LA. We also had an additional panelist, Biniam, Bizuneh, staff writer for Jimmy Kimmel, Dave, and many other shows, but his flight from New York got delayed. So we're going to zoom him in at a certain point while he's in his Uber on his way here, but he will be here, so you guys can ask him any questions and still talk with him towards the end of it.
And then just real quick before we begin, I want to encourage the audience to please don't be shy, come up, please participate in the discussion. We have a microphone here for you guys, literally. This is like a clubhouse format, so if you guys feel so compelled or you want to add more to the discussion, please come up and speak. That is a big part of what we're doing here today.
And a special shout out to Dr. Mehret Mandefro, who we're going to zoom in towards the end as well. She's done a lot of incredible things. She'll go into detail about that. She's on the grounds in Ethiopia working in the film industry there, and is, I can go down the list of her resume, but it's pretty extensive. So, we're going to zoom her in also later. So we have a incredibly diverse panel, so please give them a warm welcome. And with breaking into the industry, you know? Something that we all it's kind of like a mystified concept, you know, when it comes to entertainment. How do you get into it? It's just like, I want to be in it, but how did you get there? So can you all introduce yourselves, your current roles, and how did you get to where you are now? Just like a quick version.
Hi, like you said, I'm Selome Haile. I'm a reporter at Variety. I cover the TV industry there. As far as breaking in, I feel like that's still happening. I've only been in LA a year and a half, and like a year into having a full-time job, so like check in with me in a couple years. But as far as how I got here, so I'm from Austin, Texas, where I grew up. I was in school studying English. I knew I wanted to be a writer in some capacity, didn't know how, kind of found my way into student journalism while I was in school. And then kind of randomly, a girl that I like kind of knew in high school, but like didn't really she was at a really good journalism school that like placed their students in really good internships. And so she was interning at Variety, like she was a year above me. I reached out to her after reading a story that she posted. I was like not trying to anger her for anything. I'm really uncomfortable with networking, but I just read her work and was like, oh, this is really cool. And she was like, oh, do you want to meet my boss? And I was like, no. But then eventually went through with it. So after I graduated college, I moved out here, did an internship with them for 6 months, and then stuck around on the TV team.
Hello, my name is Leah, and I'm a Associate Creative Director at Parkwood Entertainment. How I got started, I was in New York for grad school studying design and technology, and it was the same year that Beyonce had the Formation Scholars scholarship. So I applied for the scholarship. I was runner-up at my school. They interviewed me for an internship, and I got the internship. After graduating, I freelanced for a little bit before they offered me a staff position, and I've been there ever since. So it's been about 5 years. That's my quick story.
Hi everyone, I'm Yoel Makonnen, and I'm a co-founder and CEO of Old World New World Productions. And I agree with you, Selome. I also don't think that a break-in as much as a quietly entering the Hollywood space. But I started the company with my wife Ariana, and we moved from DC to LA back in January 2020. And basically our mission is to tell powerful Ethiopian and Black diaspora stories that inspire global audiences. So stories that are universal but very culturally specific. And so we've been doing this for the past 2 years, and every day at it. Hopefully we'll be announcing some things soon, but obviously, as we all know in this industry, everything takes a lot of time. But anyway, glad to be here.
Thank you. Well, we're excited to see what it is that you announce coming soon, I hope. So tell us, what's the favorite part about what you guys do?
That is a hard question. I think my favorite part about what I do is also why I'm feel weird about being here, because my job is about asking questions and listening, and not about answering questions or people looking at me. But yeah, I've gotten to meet a lot of really wonderful people doing what I do, both at my place of work. I mean, I've learned a lot from a lot of really wonderful people, but I think that I grew up kind of in a lot of art spaces, didn't know exactly where I was gonna end up. I performed, I did theater, I did dance, I did music, I did art, and I never knew, I never felt drawn to being a performer or being an artist in that way, but knew I wanted to be adjacent in some way. And what realized as I grew older that what I loved about being in those spaces was the rehearsal process, the ideation process, having questions, coming together, talking to people, deciding what my interpretation of a text was, and putting those choices together. And so journalism for me kind of became a way to just get to be adjacent and be a parasite and latch onto all these artists that I think are cool. And when I have questions, I get to ask them instead of just continuing to wonder. Yeah.
For me, I think the most interesting thing about being in a creative space professionally is that it's kind of a never-ending cycle of learning something new. I think there are a lot of stories that haven't been told, as I'm sure all of you know. And with that means more collaborations, more people who may not have had the study or the background of, let's say, filmmaking or creating. And I think having that raw, never done this before, I'm just gonna figure it out as I go mentality, and meeting more people like that, you continue to learn different ways of telling stories, of capturing narratives, of capturing faces and portraits. And I think we're in a space now with just the accessibility that the film industry and the music industry, because now everyone has access to it in a different way than before. I think you're constantly going to be inspired to kind of find new intentions for every single story you're telling, and the perspective as well. So I think that's probably the most interesting thing for me.
Yeah, I think for me the most interesting part of the work is definitely obviously the creative part, storytelling. It's such a powerful tool in you know, in human life and human history, and I think I get a lot of pleasure out of sharing my culture in a powerful way to reshape the narrative for Ethiopia, for Africa in general, in the world. And I just really enjoy when I get to talk to somebody and they're so excited because they didn't know about a story that, you know, some of us growing up in this culture, we know very well, but the Ethiopian culture especially has not been as widely shared as others. And so I get a lot of pleasure. It makes me feel proud to put out a narrative out there that people can get to relate to our people more, and also just learn of how a rich history we have.
Incredible. Okay, so really quick, kind of like popcorn. What's a project you've worked on that you're most proud of? Just real quick.
In any order.
Okay, I don't know what I'm most proud of, but like the most like recent big project I did was in November went to a cabin in the middle of the woods in upstate New York to talk to Steve from Blue's Clues, who I like grew up on.
Actually super epic.
Yeah, he like lives in the middle of nowhere. I went to his house. He like made me chili, and we talked for 2.5 hours about like children's media and what he's been doing for the last 20 years, and that was really cool.
He dropped where he was like, "I'm sorry for disappearing."
Yeah.
That really touched me.
Yeah, we talked all about that and how he got to that point and everything. That was really cool. Yeah.
Oh, we know you got a lot. Beyonce, come on now.
I don't know if I necessarily have a favorite, but I can say that between Homecoming and Black is King, I think what I liked about both are kind of like in contrast to one another. So for Homecoming, being first generation, growing up in the US, understanding a lot of the Black American culture that was kind of displayed in that film and feeling connected to that was an amazing feeling. And then on the other hand, with Black is King, I felt like I was able to contribute more perspective as an Ethiopian American. Not that it was mainly, you know, Afrobeats is kind of more on the West African side of influence, but still in ways I was able to kind of suggest cast or some wardrobe, some styling, things that we can kind of just be proud of, even though it's not the majority of the cultures represented. So yeah, I think I don't have a favorite. I don't think I'll ever have a favorite project. I do a lot of freelance work on the side too, so it's hard to compare personal projects to work projects to client projects, so yeah.
Black is King was epic. So that's my favorite for you. I'll split into two. I'll say one project that I've accomplished and completed, and another one that I've yet to do. But one I'm especially proud of is the children's book that I wrote, a two-book series actually, called Last Gate of the Emperor, which is a Afrofuturistic sci-fi adventure centered around Ethiopia with an Ethiopian young boy character who's the hero of our story. Very deeply inspired by my own life, kind of discovering my roots. So I kind of imbued that into his character. He discovers that he's connected to this royal family that ruled, you know, the galaxy. So very proud of that, and I'm very happy that children are enjoying it, because really that's the future, right? The next generation, if they can grow up with these stories, it will just be second nature to them. Whereas when I grew up, there weren't stories like that. So I'm very proud of that one.
I just want to tag on real quick, just a little comment on what Leah mentioned to Black is King and about even basically taking up space as an East African person, and even though that obviously we all know that Beyonce is very large. She's a very large player in the Western canon, and as Afrobeats and more African creative influence gets to be on the main stage, the fact that you are still taking up space and making sure there are those little nuances that are coming from us helps to actually counter the idea that Africa is a country, right? Because there's still a lot of media currently that's going around that it's easy for people who are on the outside to assume a lot of things. A lot of those nuances are missed, so I just wanted to tag that on there.
And then you said you.
Yeah, the other project that yet to do, no worries, is a TV series centered around the life and coming to power of Emperor Haile Selassie, who's my great-grandfather. So you can imagine The Crown meets Game of Thrones. And that's a project that we're actively working on now, and it's going to be called King of Kings. Very, very proud of that one, too.
Sorry, I have a comment on that. Yeah, so that's going to be a lot of like groundbreaking. As we know, like a lot of television has developed into like the historical drama, but also just TV, almost like movies at this point. And I'm very proud of that for you, just because of the fact that one, like we really need to tell that story needs to be told for a lot of different reasons, right? Like collective healing, right? There's collective just history that, I'm gonna say this real short. I went to an event. There was a book vendor there. That book vendor happened to be a Habesha book vendor. I was so floored because I've never seen like Habesha history books written in English that are available in the U.S. Like I have to like hit my mom up to find a book and get it translated, and maybe go over to Ethiopia and grab, you know what I mean? Like it's like a whole process. So just the fact that more of the history is coming out and people can actually like collectively experience it and digest it, process it, and then like build off of that, it's very, very important. So.
And it's incredible. We're seeing a lot more of this as well. As I testify with Sheba, who is producing a show, I guess, about the Queen of Sheba, and it's being told from an Ethiopian's perspective as well. She's co-producing it, so that's incredible. Like everything we're talking about today, we're actually seeing it happen in real life at the same time. So literally in real time. For Yoel, so as someone who comes from a non-traditional background, being a corporate attorney, going into film, why did you choose to get into film, and why did you use media specifically to look deeper into Ethiopia?
Sure. So I think I've always, even through school and law school, always been very creative. I always had my eyes on entertainment, but as life happens, and I kind of went into the corporate lawyer career that I'm in now. But I always had this deep sense that I wanted to tell the story, like carrying the torch, right? I definitely feel, just as an Ethiopian, and then on top of that, being a member of the Ethiopian royal family, a deep responsibility to tell these stories. And I think the real spark came, so my wife and I used to talk about making a film, a documentary all the time, and then we got married, and as some of you may have seen, we got a lot of press, and it was very kind of everywhere. And at that time, we started getting people reaching out to us. And so that's when we decided, okay, this is good momentum. Let's start coming to LA. And we started taking trips from DC. And then I tapped into my network, obviously, from law school. Howard is very deep in the industry. So I've been very grateful for all the connections I've made through my law school friends. And decided, okay, the moment is right. And then, of course, since we moved here, obviously, Black content has gotten even hotter, obviously, after all the happenings in 2020, where now there's actually an interest. And I think that there's also an interest because it's commercially viable and successful. So the timing felt really right, and that's why now I still practice law, so this is what we do here is in addition to that. But definitely looking to transition fully into the storytelling because, as I said, I feel like we have such a rich history that people don't really know about. And I realized that, you can't wait on others to tell your story. You have to, get in the game and do it yourself. So that's why now the timing felt right to make this pivot.
So we're going to transition to hobby versus career because, a lot of people do want to get into film and TV, but it's how do you make that transition from it being a hobby to making it a professional thing that you get paid from. So Selome, tell us, so how do you balance your passion for film with the tenacity that's required to take it to a professional level?
I think I'm in kind of a strange position in that, like, as a journalist, it's like, it's doing what I do is something that's kind of hard to be able to pursue on like at least like a personally fulfilling level as a hobby, because like so much of like, because like getting to to ask people questions that like all the burning questions that I have, like the hobby part of it for me is like when I'm home on my couch watching TV and movies, and like having the questions, and it's like, well, damn, I either don't get the question answered or I turn it into work and look up their publicist and set up a call. I guess that, I don't know about, is there a balance? I don't know if I have a good answer for that personally, but I think I've come to a really wonderful place where like, I think that I am able to kind of couch some things and keep them personal, and not turn everything into work. But yeah, I think the love is just in the engagement in watching TV, watching film, having conversations with others about it. But yeah, it's a little bit different, and whereas I feel like you can like write a film on your own and keep it for yourself if you want to, in a way that I'm jealous of.
Yo, what's good?
Okay, so welcome. This is Biniam Bizuneh. So he's a comedian, staff writer for Jimmy Kimmel Live, Dave Season 2, Resident Alien, and many other great works. Like we said, he had a flight, so he was a bit late, but he made it.
And then the lift brought me quicker than I thought, so I'm here.
That could be like a whole show episode.
I mean, it felt like it. I was like looking at the clock, my phone was dying. We made it.
You made it. Thank you for making it.
Thanks for having me.
So for Leah, have you been in a position where you had to choose the integrity of a concept while dealing with the realities of production? So, maybe you have this great idea, but you have budget and logistics, and as a creative director, you have to be mindful of all that, especially working on big projects. And I know you said you freelance, so there's a range probably, but how does that look for you?
It's tough. It's very tough. It ranges. It depends on the project, I think. When it comes to client work and freelance work, sometimes it's not as important to me to kind of have invested some emotions or feelings towards an idea or a project. But when you have invested a lot of your own, perspective or creativity or interest, and you get attached, which is like the first rule you shouldn't do. You should never get attached to any idea, especially if it's not something you're producing or creating on your own. It's just tricky. There's ways of changing it. Maybe there's different iterations. You can kind of take a different approach to the concept. I think the most important step is identifying the intention. And once you have that intention locked, if the budget is an issue or if time is an issue, there's ways of creating variations of that initial intention and still having a beautiful outcome of that project. If you are just creating based on aesthetic, then you're gonna hit a few more bumps in the road. If like a budget is an issue, you may not be able to get that aesthetic that you were hoping for. And that's why I try to always lead with intention. That way the medium or the outcome can be anything as long as it ties back to your initial goal.
That makes sense. Okay, so we're gonna switch topics now. So we're gonna go to Habesha versus Habesha American and that distinction. So there's obviously similarities, right? We all look the same, we all eat the food, same foods and all that. But at the end of the day, we come from very different perspectives. Like, I can say I'm Habesha, but I can't necessarily relate with the experience of people back home. Like, I have a very unique perspective that a lot of us can relate to as being part of the diaspora. And so that translates when it comes into the work that we do and the narratives that we tell, because we can't exactly tell the stories of people back home, nor should we try to. We have a very unique way of living and stories to tell. So question it would be, does it make sense for us to have our own lexicon of film as diaspora? Or I think I kind of answered it for us, but why, what is it, how is it important for you, for our, what am I asking?
The story that we're telling right now as Habesha Americans as we continue to walk into the future and, really create what it means to be Habesha American, especially as first gen, since a lot of people who came today, the first thing they said was, hey, this didn't exist when I first got here, So we're doing that. We're bridging those gaps. And so, anyway.
I do think, though, however, being Habesha American, it's obviously important to tell stories from your perspective and be as authentic as you can. But let's say I wanted to create something based on my mother's story or my father's story. I think there are ways to go about that and still be authentic and true to the culture. You just need to do your research and properly account for events, or I don't know. I think people in American film do that all the time, right? They tell stories of a time period that they're not in, so it's not necessarily authentic, and the culture has shifted regardless of where you're from and how you identify. But there are right ways of doing it and there are wrong ways of doing it. So I think obviously it's best to just always be as authentic and respectful, whether or not it's your story or someone else's story. But I think we still have the responsibility to highlight stories of people back home, given the platform and the opportunity and the privilege we have. But we just need to be careful that we're not telling the story for them versus helping them tell their story.
Okay, is this open to everybody?
I don't know if y'all felt that, but I felt that last point.
I was just at Sundance, and they had this African filmmakers panel, and one of the dudes on it was his former ambassador to South Africa, and he was talking about how when he would have these meetings, not even about just people investing in film, but any type of investment in Africa, you should invest in business here, you should build a theater here, whatever. So many of the people he'd be talking to would be like, but Africa, don't you have blood diamonds and child soldiers or whatever, and they're just repeating what they've seen from the media that's often made by the West. It's not made by the people who actually live there. And he was talking about how if you empower the people who live there, or it's coming together with us from the resources we have and connects we have to work with people over there, you can make these things that are just about what's the insecure of Ethiopia, what's the stuff that's just about people living, that isn't about this is the hardest fucking starvation bullshit, and that's what I'm excited to see, is just stories of everyday life. And West Africa has it going on with Nollywood and whatever. It's where's our Habesha wood, let's get that going.
So what does that look like? What does bridging the gap between folks here and folks back home look like? Do we have writers go back there, or talent from there come here? And
I have a lot of ideas on how to accomplish that, but I think it's going back and spending time there and getting to, how can you not create like you're someone from the West? I think you gotta humble yourself and be I don't know everything.
This may sound like I'm contradicting what I said earlier, but I think even if we do start with ourselves, or do start with the first generation experience, that still involves our parents or our relatives who were born there. We have cousins who were born there. I think it's still relevant, and it still does the job of representing, even if we're not going back, because a lot of people don't have the privilege of going back.
Yeah.
And spending a lot of time there to do that research. I think you can start at your home. It's like Rami or Mo, they're telling these stories either as immigrants, young immigrants, or first generation, and it's funny, and you still get a sense of who their parents are, where their parents came from, but from a perspective that we all can relate to, even if it's not from the same country. And I think we have these examples, and it doesn't have to be a comedy, but I'm just saying, you can start at home, you can start with your own story and how you relate to your parents or how you relate to people at your church, and you'll make it to this authentic place, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I feel like there's also, I'm really excited to talk to Dr. Mehret about what she's doing in Ethiopia because, like, as somebody who, like, I grew up in Texas, I'm not fluent in Amharic. I mean, I've, like, only been able to engage with, like, a pretty small amount of, like, Habesha media, like, really Habesha media, because so much of, like, what's there, it's, like, is produced on a small scale that, like, isn't for exporting to America, but also, like, I feel like so much of, like, figuring out what an Habesha film lexicon, an Habesha American film lexicon is, like, would have to be about engaging with what's already there. And it's like, we have so many people who are bilingual. It's like, let's take what's there, let's get subtitles, let's do translations and figure out what the culture is there. Because it's not like, you know, we aren't, because we, like, came to America and learned English and things, that we're not the only ones who, like, know how to write and, like, can crack a joke, you know? So I think that, yeah, there's so much to do with, like, I don't know, it just makes me think about, like, you know, when, like white people move to, like, a gentrifying neighborhood and they're like, we have to do something for the poor people. Like, I think we have a lot of, like, power and ability and possibility in, like, the position that we're all in working in this industry. But also I feel like we shouldn't treat anything like we're working from scratch when we haven't, like, found a way to engage with what already exists.
So the question, well, we had a question of, was there an interest between us going back to Ethiopia and creating that? So it sounds like that there's a general consensus of this, right? That there is a need for this. And
A need? I think there's an interest.
There's an interest.
I don't know about need. I think you kind of touched on that. Again, if the point is storytelling, there's plenty of people doing it already, and there's plenty of ways to continue doing it. But I don't know if it's a need right now, and I don't know if it's not happening already.
yeah, good point. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting how, like, people from so many different cultures will tell their stories without the worry that it's too niche or small. You know, like, how many movies are there about, like, World War II or the Holocaust or about whatever, you know, I know that's just a specific thing, but it's like, I think I've thought in the past that, oh, stories about this is for too small of an audience, or how many people are there that there's this, like, this is for. But I think the truth is, if it's a, like, engaging story about humans, like, people that aren't Habesha will also enjoy it too. And so I think, like, we shouldn't, like, hold ourselves, you know, back by thinking this, we don't have enough of us or something, you know? Yeah, that's just another thing. And also agreeing with what you said about making things that are about ourselves and using examples like Rami or Mo. Like, I made a pilot this past year for Hulu that's exactly that. It's like me and my friend who, like, my character is Habesha American, his character is Nigerian American, and we got to shoot that, and Rami was one of our producers, and it was literally what you're saying. Like, it was, but we didn't lead with they're African, like, that's their whole identity. It was just like they happened to be, you know, and that works its way into the story. But yeah, I think in the same way, like, anyone could happen to be Jewish or they happen to be Muslim, like, I think it was relatable to everyone who's first generation.
Yeah, I mean, there's a great example of that out right now. So there's a director named Aiden Ababa in Toronto, and she created Virgin the series. And it's a show about these 20-something-year-old East African girls who are friends, and they're just navigating life as 20-something-year-olds, dealing with relationships and just life in general, and, you know, how chaotic that and crazy that can be. And it got picked up by a streaming service in Canada. And so, you know, there's people out here telling these stories. That's not the focal point. It's not, oh, we're just Habesha or anything like that. But, you know, it's part of our identity. Of course, it's gonna be apparent in the content, but it doesn't have to be so forthright. Yeah.
It's like few and far between, I guess. Well, and it's also like about distribution, like Mehret was talking about. Like, if you don't have the platform for people to really see it, then it basically doesn't exist, right? But there's this dude, what's the name of that? He's like a director who he's like old school Ethiopian director who
Haile.
Garima, yeah. He's made everybody knew it. It was like Haile.
His quote is actually on the back of our Hollywood is Habesha shirt.
Oh, that's sick. That's sick. Yeah.
We are willing to pay the price of our own stories.
And he made a film that was about like people escaping the Derg and going and moving somewhere else. And I thought that movie is dope, but like not a lot of people have seen it. But that's one of the only movies I've seen that is like, there's so many movies about white people's history.
Yeah.
There's barely any scripted versions of ourselves doing it. And so when I saw that, it made me inspired. Like, oh, I could tell my parents' story, because we all have similar kind of stories of people having to move because of whatever, but yeah, I'll let someone else talk, but that's all I had to say.
Yeah, so Haile Garima is an interesting person. His approach that he took was interesting. It was very anti-Hollywood. So do we think, moving forward, is being anti-Hollywood the appropriate approach? Should we work with Hollywood to tell our stories? Should we tell it on our own? I know Dr. Mehret was saying that, we should take initiative and tell our own stories, but what do you guys think?
Two things. I think one, he had to be anti-Hollywood in order to stay as true and as authentic as he can. And two, I think today we really have the power is really in our hands and the control is in our hands, right? So some people don't mind kind of having that Hollywood support. It might mean more to have like a wider, I guess, net to tell a story on the surface versus people who might care more about the message and are okay with like a more niche audience so that the control stays with them. I don't think there's nothing really bad about going the Hollywood route, I don't think. It just depends on the story you're trying to tell and how much control you're willing to kind of give up. Because at the end of the day, the Hollywood approach is the more money, and like more money comes more rules. So yeah, I think it just depends on the person creating, the person telling the story. But you can be successful today in just having kind of the control in your hands, given all the different platforms that we can kind of self-distribute. It just might take a longer path to get more people's eyes on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I interviewed Gash Haile like about a year ago when he was in LA for a while. He lives in DC, but he was in LA for a while because he works with Ava DuVernay and her production company Array. They have their headquarters downtown. And so he was here doing a master class with like artists across disciplines, not just filmmakers. And then at the same time, they were like re-releasing Sankofa, which is like this film that he's most well known for, onto Netflix, which was like huge and weird kind of for his legacy because like his whole thing was like he was an LA Rebellion filmmaker. There was all these black filmmakers that went to UCLA together that like like you said, had to be anti-Hollywood. Nobody would distribute their films. Nobody wanted to look at them. And then now he has his film that's like such a huge part of his legacy that's on Netflix. And so we were talking about that, and I asked him how it felt to reconcile his whole thing being anti-Hollywood with like, I guess, seeing himself beginning to be embraced by the industry in a way. At the same time, he was being honored at the Academy Museum when it was like being opening for the first time as their like the vanguard. It was like some award that they're starting that's going to be like awarded to a major filmmaker every year, and he was their inaugural one. So it was this weird moment where like decades after he got his start and made his name, parts of Hollywood are starting to pay attention to him. And so I asked him how that felt and how that fits into his ideology, and he was like, Selome, I don't know Hollywood, I don't know Netflix, I know Ava. And it was really interesting. He went on to talk more about how, exactly what you're saying about how like, you can pick your approach, you can go the Hollywood route, you can go elsewhere. I think it's gonna take a lot of people doing different things and choosing to work together when it makes sense. Being a studio filmmaker is never gonna make sense for him. Like I was asking him kind of about the Netflix deal and how that got put together, and he was just not involved with it. He was like, I don't have a cell phone, I don't know, Ava did that. And he was like, I'm so happy, yeah. He was like, I'm so happy people are watching the film, and like I trust her because I have a relationship with her. She made that happen, and that's cool. But Hollywood can never embrace me. I should pull up, I don't want to butcher it, but he said something where he was like, Hollywood can never embrace me. I'm not a decoy. I'm not like gonna be a face of Hollywood erasing everything that it's done to people like me for so long. So I'm glad people are watching my movie now, but I go back to my cave, and he's working on this like 5-hour documentary he's making.
Which, Ottawa?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just to add to that, I used to work at with the owners at Oslo Vegan, and I think some people here, I think I saw like Miriam and Henok too, like we also did a fundraiser type of event to have people see the uncut, unedited version of this 5-hour documentary, which is now, I would say, probably 30 years in the making.
Yeah.
Or 20 years in the making, but it's more important, I think this is what he said, it's more important for him to continue working on this and not giving himself a deadline, because you can't really alter the accent, or you can't really alter the emotions that as the maker you're seeing as you're cutting, as you're in the editing room and cutting this film. I literally think it's been, I could be wrong, but it's 25 years or something like that in the making. Like it's almost like it's never going to be done, but that's archival work. Like it was present one day, now 25 years later, that same thing he's working on is literally an archival piece of history, but also a film that you can watch today and embrace and see the rawness of it. And I think that's the biggest benefit of being anti-Hollywood, is you don't need to follow any aesthetic continuity or process that is deemed the right way, because there's emotion in seeing something that's raw and edited very randomly, I would say, or it's abruptly cut halfway, kind of get static or a black frame for 2 seconds, and then it's, you know what I mean? It's just, there's something that's like a real documentary. It's really as raw as it can get, and who knows when it'll be done, but I think there's something beautiful in his patience and his process.
So I asked him about that too. I was like, what does it look like to work on a film for 30 years? Like, how many hours a week are we putting into this? Like, and he told me that it's actually like basically done, but the reason that it's not like packaged and like available to see is because like he ripped stuff from Italian archives from like with that. Basically, he was like, the Italians won't give me the rights to the things that I put in the movie.
Couldn't get the samples cleared.
Yeah, like he was like, next time you're in DC, come to my house and you can watch the movie. But I was like, okay, gosh, and the publicist was like, let's wrap this up. Yeah, there's something really incredible about like that uncompromising vision, and like we might never see that movie unless, except for, I mean, okay, those of us who are lucky enough to end up in his house in DC to go see it. But yeah, I don't think that we can necessarily all be that way, but I think it takes some of us to be that way, and then it takes somebody like Ava, who kind of cut her teeth and took her time and like came up learning from folks like Haile and studying films like that, and then choosing to go a more traditional route to like give us those special moments where it's like now we can watch Sankofa on Netflix and talk about it.
I just want to tack on something that came up for me while both of you were speaking. So for Haile Gerima, I'm also very intrigued by him, even as a designer, because I was looking at one of his interviews and he had said something that stuck out to me about leaving behind cultural pyramids. For up and coming, for Black people in general, like we don't have cultural pyramids, right? So like white people, they have Warner Brothers, they have these like huge like engines behind them, basically. And so to the comment that you just made about like, oh, if we're lucky enough to know Gashe Haile, but like going off of what Mehret was saying and what we've all kind of been circling around of this like horizontal power structure, my dream is that we can actually put together events where we can have screenings of those private things, and Haile Gerima can come and talk about it, and because we need to see that. Like all of us, like that's a cultural pyramid. Even if it's not a physical space, it's a psychological space, a creative space, and so there's a lot of there's probably Haile Gerimas in this room. Matter of fact, like up and coming future ones. So that's just my comment. And then obviously, if you guys want to chime in, yes, Hannah.
Yeah, I was shouted out a little, so I wanted to jump in. He is a family friend, actually, on a couple sides, and it's funny because his son Marawi went the Netflix route kind of first before he was in that weird position, that just the position that you were talking about. But to talk about a funny scene from the screening that we watched a few years ago, I didn't know this about his father until he told me. His name is Haile, right? It's funny when we call Ethiopians by their last names. In Ethiopia, you call people by their first name. So the Garima in the Haile Garima was his dad, and he was an Ethiopian Orthodox priest, but he was also a fighter against the Italian fascists during the time of the monarchy. And then he became one of the foremost playwrights. And all that, those three different facets of him in so many different ways of his life were in the movie on World War II that he's been making forever. So I think, Dee took my first question actually, which was what you guys are all talking about, but I think it shows the functionality, whether you want to go the independent route or whether you want to go, mainstream or whatever we want to call it, the corporate route. Do you, and then, if those personal connections are there and some of us are independent and some of us are there, as long as we trust each other, we can make the best of both worlds. And if I could ask a question, actually, it's funny, I think some people have kind of an inevitability view of history, and so there's some songs by Teddy Afro and stuff about the monarchy, the Solomonic dynasty, but I think it hasn't been painted in as positive light over the past 50 years. And the folks behind Grandpa was an emperor, which was screened on Crenshaw and King and Lamert, talking about connecting to our Black American spaces in South LA. I was at the LA screening, I don't know if anyone else here was. I think that was a step in the direction. I was wondering if Prince Yoel could talk about maybe the mixed feelings, and maybe even different panelists may have that, but the mixed feelings about kind of the legacy of the Solomonic dynasty. And as anyone who knows my minor YouTube channel would say, its prospects for return.
Yes, Grandpa was an Emperor is a fantastic documentary. I encourage everybody to go watch it if you can. That's my cousin Yeshi, actually, and I'm really excited about her doing that because it's time to tell our stories. And I think for us, especially in the royal family, we feel a special responsibility to carry the legacy and at least let the story be told, because I totally agree with what you're saying. And I experienced that, for instance, when we got married and it was all over social media. A lot of the comments were great, and then some comments were, glad we don't have the monarchy anymore. Although the ones that really surprised me the most were those who said, oh, we had a monarchy, we had a king, when? This is Ethiopians in the comments saying that. Those were the ones that hurt me the most. I understand people love it or hate it, but people just didn't know. That made me also realize how much of our history we're losing. And like you said, obviously it was intentional by previous regimes who wanted to kind of delete that history that didn't happen and start kind of Ethiopia as a brand new country, which is, to me, very ironic, given that we're such an old country with so much history, that we would act like we just started 50 years ago. It's really paining me that that was the design that some people did. Now, I do agree with you. I think Teddy Afro and others have kind of brought it back into the mainstream, but it is true that I've noticed a kind of glaring missing part of our history, which I think we can address in a truthful way, in a open-minded way. Obviously, not everything was great, but we had a lot of great history, and I just think that it's really a shame that we would deprive ourselves of such a long legacy in our country. Now, obviously, people can feel how they feel about it, but I don't accept that people will act like it never happened. We're on a different course now, Ethiopia, right? The prospects for the return of the monarchy, I can't tell you the polling right now. I don't know what's the status there. I do know that people talk about it a lot, but all I'm hoping is that at least by telling the stories, people can examine them, we can debate them, but they are essentially a part of who we are, and we can't deny that. Denying that is denying our own story.
Just to go off of Yoel, I think that his point about let's actually get the work out and let it be examined is such an important point, because that's how we grow and heal, right? We can talk about these things and we can grow and heal, and then more people can make work about that, and maybe it'll be from a different perspective, but now we actually have a foundation, right? So I think that's like a very, very important point.
Yeah, I agree. And just to continue on that, we can't heal until we address it. And I totally agree. I think that has been the problem of all the successive regimes we've had. You know, the communist coup happened, toppled the monarchy, and then they were like, yeah, forget the monarchy, don't talk about it. It was the worst thing ever. And then, the Federal Republic is established, and they're like, yeah, the Derg and everybody before that, they were terrible. Everybody's terrible. And then now, same thing, right? In a way. I don't want to get political, but you know what I'm talking about. That there's just this desire to kind of completely vanquish whoever came before. And that's very unhealthy for our people, because it's discontinuous. You have to be connected to your history, whether you like it or not. It's part of who you are. And I totally agree that until we do that we have like a sort of truth and reconciliation, that's something I've seen a lot ever since the war came out, is all of these narratives on social media about this people did this to that people and they were oppressed and this, and it's like, let's talk about it. Maybe there's some true grievances there, but there's also a lot of misinformation, things that have just been made up on the way. And until we get to the truth, we can't really move forward in a positive way.
I think also, I don't know how to say this, but I think, a few years ago, my friends and I it was around the same time we screened the documentary, we were kind of questioning, like, why don't we have any of these things in writing or in film or in the arts or in any medium? And I don't remember who said this, but I think they said something along the lines of, well, there's a lot of trauma that our parents have held back from us. And I think it kind of paints this picture of, okay, we know our parents immigrated here, we don't know for what reason. Maybe some of us do, some of us didn't. Or we find out later that our uncle is a poet, or our other uncle is a writer and had a passion for filmmaking and just wasn't able to do it because of historical events. And it made us kind of come to this conclusion where it's like, in order to get to a place where you can tell these stories, there has to be some healing. There has to be something like therapeutic, something for the historians who are still here to be able to kind of open up and tell these stories from a perspective of truth.
And let them breathe.
And don't feel so pressured to like create something. I know we all want this. And maybe you have a source that is ready to kind of open up and give that type of information out. But I think there's a lot of healing that needs to happen in the generations before us, and then conversations on their time. And I think once you can record it, you can audio record it, with permission, of course, and you can write about it. But I think there needs to be healing. There needs to be conversations and time. I don't know. I think it's something that it's going to be very. If we start now, or maybe it's been happening, or I don't know, but I think unless we're telling stories from our perspective, once we get into, and this is just my opinion, once we get down this like historical retelling of something, there's gonna have to be a lot of perspectives involved.
Definitely.
And I think it needs to start with healing. I don't know.
It should be a mosaic,
Yeah.
There's this book that it's fiction, but it's based on truth. Under the Lion's Gaze, you know about this?
Oh, yeah.
And that got a movie deal, and it's all about a doctor escaping from the Derg, why they're leaving, a story of 3 women. But it's like, I don't know if it'll get made, but it's like there are people trying to do it, and I think, we're kind of in the infancy of being able to do that. So over time, we'll start to have like, what's our version of like Saving Private Ryan, or whatever the fuck, we're gonna have, and even like, I don't know if you guys saw this, like Ozzy Tesfaye,
Yeah.
she's got a show in development with Coogler's company called Queen of Sheba, which is obviously like way earlier than the period we're talking about, but that's the start. It's like, she described it to me as it'll be like Ethiopian Game of Thrones or Habesha Game of Thrones, and I'm like, that's sick. Let's see that, because that's real.
Mm-hmm.
That was real. But you wouldn't know that based on,
What's available.
Exactly, yeah.
I just want to say one more thing.
We have a question as well.
Oh, I'm sorry. No.
When you're talking about doing history and reporting on that in a film found this in attempting to even try and understand the history of our people and stuff like that. Every version of story is rife with propaganda, and depending on whose pen you're reading, is skewing the reality of what the story is. And how does one, so in like, a lot of material has been lost, right? And human memory is feeble, and you can only remember what you saw, and time changes a lot of stuff too. So how can you really be accurate about a story and represent the truth of that one? And because whatever version you do, it's going to be skewed in one direction or another, and so one side of the people will feel hard done by. Or is a potential positive way to do it? So that's the question. The reason I'm asking this is like, I saw Woman King, I was gassed, and then I heard the story, I was out of bed. However, the only reason I thought it was problematic was not how they reimagined the narrative, because I think there's a philosopher that once said, whatever your belief system, it's your belief system. If living by your belief system doesn't give you a happy, fulfilled life, change the belief system, because that's not science, it's just talk, right? So with that being said, Woman King could have potentially been a positive thing in terms of reimagining the story if it was presented as, look what we could have been if we came together, and if that was a clear, open agenda that they were honest about. You know what I mean? But presenting something as factual when it isn't is problematic, right? And so as we are embarking on telling important stories from Haile Selassie, everything, the Habesha stories and everything, that is rooted in like a lot of controversy depending on whose version of reality you speak to. How do you navigate that, and how are you intending on doing that? Is it the utopic way, like as a suggestive, or is it like really trying to tell history, in which case how are you going to be able to really tell a true history with the current climate in the way that it is?
I'm gonna jump, and then obviously you guys can jump on it. I just want to say, like, as a creative, like, no, I'm not a filmmaker, but as a creative and a designer, I think it's best for us to not get into analysis paralysis. I think that you just gotta go and throw mud at the wall, and hopefully, like, whatever is put out is, like, a reaction is not a bad thing. I'm not mad. Like, I make stuff, and some people don't like it, and that's good. Like, matter of fact, I like it when people don't like my work, because it actually ignites them to go make something that they feel is more representative or true to them. And like, either way, it's good, because now we have more voices, now we have more stories. So if he makes something that you don't like, go make a better, go show us your side of it, because we're still trying to have that conversation. I mean, like, that's my approach. I'm bringing like a little bit of PA to the situation, but I'm just saying, like, I think it's good to disagree. I think it's good to agree, and I think it's good to disagree, and I think it's good to create like I was talking to somebody else, and I'm going to borrow their words, but like a rainbow. You know what I mean? You need all the colors to have the variation, and so we need all the stories to have variation in perspective, and variation in lessons, and variation in, because every message has a lesson. You know what I mean? So, but Biniam had said something that I wanted to comment on too. He said, man, what did you say, man? You said a lot. Was not the Habesha Game of Thrones. There was, you said, who's the next Habesha Insecure? And then it was something else. Haile Garim, Saving Private Ryan. I felt dirty for a long time because I wanted to see a show about the Derg. Because I heard about these crazy stories from relatives, from I just when I was young, I loved to talk to my old heads. I loved to ask them things. I loved to get into it, and they've always opened up to me and been raw. And I always wanted to see, because this is what he said. He said there's so many different takes on World War II. I have seen so much content on World War II. I don't need to see any more. I can visualize it up and down, side to side, diagonally. I feel like I was there. If I could time travel, I know exactly what I'd be wearing. Like that's how good the creative direction, everything. We've seen every angle of it. But I don't know anything about the Derg. Only the museum that I went to, and only what I've heard from my old heads. And like, I'm 30, bro. Like, I was born 92, dog. Like, it wasn't really that long ago. But like, come on, man, it's 2023. Why don't we have more stories about the Derg?
Healing and time.
I know. I'm just hyped.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more because I bet if you talk to all these different European or whatever American filmmakers about different World War II movies, they would probably be like, that's inaccurate, that one's good, that one's wrong, and that's fine. It's
Why
like,
are we so hard on ourselves?
exactly. I think because, you know, you feel like you're first, you have to be correct or perfect. Yeah, but it's like, you should try to do your best or whatever, but people, no matter what, are going to disagree and be like, that's not right. And then, yeah, but that's
art.
That's cool. And even like people, Quentin Tarantino makes movies that are like alternate history. He doesn't give a fuck about the facts. He's just like feelings. Feelings first. So, fuck it. Like.
What's that movie he made with? It's literally World War II.
Yeah.
Glorious Bastard.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. He just changed history. He was like, yeah, we killed Hitler. So yeah, make the movie where you killed Mengistu in it. Like, who cares?
Yeah, who cares?
You know.
I think I got your question.
Yeah, that's the question.
Yeah, I think your question was how do you make sure you portray things accurately? And I'll go even further, perhaps because have family involved in the stories that I'm trying to tell, maybe there could be some bias there. Is that what you're saying? To portray it in sort of nostalgic, positive way?
Fine if but the problem with Women King was the lack of transparency in its agenda and whatever. It was presented as this is almost a biopic of like a people in Africa.
Right.
Historical fiction. There's a few articles about it, but I think the it's just it wasn't presented as a documentary or a biopic. It was presented as historical fiction.
But it like the social consensus of understanding of what everyone in the UK, I don't know how it is here, we went understanding, perceiving that.
But the filmmakers didn't say that. That was the thing. It's the media or Black Twitter or whoever interpreted that way. But that wasn't the intention of the filmmakers. So I think it kind of harmed the film, like language like that, because no one said the filmmakers didn't say this is facts. They took something that was historical and they reimagined.
But they highlighted it was about this community, this tribe in Africa who these women.
Yeah, they didn't say it was facts.
But nor did they actually overtly really.
They did. There's articles and there's interviews.
Okay, well maybe they're not as available to, because when I watched every interview every actor did and whatever, and it was not in the prominent conversation for the things that they were saying.
It must be a great film because we got a discussion happening, you know? Like, it's good. That's the point, though.
I think to our question, though, is what is your guys' approach on the discernment going to be in regards to that topic?
Well, I think that's the beauty about film, TV, any type of creative work is that you are there telling a story, your version of it. Now, I agree that you should try to be as accurate, especially when you're portraying history, but the truth is, even historical elements are always subjective, right? You know the expression, the winners get to tell the story. It's kind of like that. It's like you're doing the story, I get to tell the story, and then just like Nao said and Biniam, I couldn't agree more. It's the marketplace of ideas. You put out your story, and let's see, let the best idea win. And inevitably, when you're doing, especially a creative process like a film, you're gonna have people involved anyway. So it's not like a book. When you're a book writer, you can write it all up by yourself. When you're making a film, TV, there's going to be so many people. So I think what the approach I take is that always stay open-minded and listen to what others' perspectives are so that your story can get as many perspectives as possible. But the end product is always going to have a take. And that's what we're here to do as creators, is to say, hey, this is my version of the story. You can ask, each people who attended this evening tonight, how did it go? They'll tell you a different version, right? All of them are true to them. But anyway, my point is I agree with you that I think it's important, especially when you're trying to portray history, as accurately as possible. But inevitably, there's be some subjectivity to it. And with the Woman King, I don't know why the whole hoopla was about, because I know that one of the criticism was that, oh, this is a tribe that was engaged in slavery. I don't think the movie the movie didn't hide that. And then they addressed it at the end when they're like, we're doing the slavery thing, it's not good, we should change. So I thought it was addressed, and I agree that I think it can hurt our own movies when we start to kind of scrutinize and try to, bring down a very noble effort of portraying an African tribe which has been, these legendary fighters, and they're women on top of that.
So the reason it was problematic, again,
Mhm.
I'm a big fan of the film, I have my friends in it, I studied with her, right? And I think everyone should still see it, any
Mhm.
person on screen should be seen, right? The reason it was problematic, now that I've done some little bit of research, is that not only was that tribe synonymous in the slave trade,
Mhm.
when the transition moving away from the slave trade was happening, they pivoted. Instead of trading slaves across to white people, they started doing it within Africa. So
Okay.
they were not forefronting it. In fact, they were one of the last ones. They were probably against the fact that slave trade was happening. So that's the bit that was part of the story
Right.
that was problematic. Lupita was supposed to be part of the project, and when she found out this research, there's a whole documentary she did with the BBC and stuff like that, which isn't as available to even, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
this is, again, I think the story is beautiful, and if, like, in terms of, if that's, look what we can do as black people, and like, this is a version of reality that happened, and look what could have happened if we came together.
Right.
I think if that was at the forefront of the marketing or whatever in every conversation, I think it would have been received very differently from everyone in the community.
Yeah.
That's my point, just in terms of transparency and trying to, when you make a mistake, call yourself out on it and be like, whatever, acknowledging that this is,
Right.
so with your film, I guess my question is whatever your agenda is, follow it through 100%, like it's your film. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if you're trying to get as close to the truth, and I'm asking how you're gonna try and access that.
Yeah, I definitely starting to put together a team from academics who are experts, people who have lived through that period, people who have actual firsthand knowledge. Half of my family was imprisoned during the Dirk, so I'm getting a lot of these kind of firsthand accounts too from them. And then the idea is also to surround yourself with people who can give interesting perspectives, and that's actually sometimes people who are not from your culture. I know that we just talked about Habesha versus non-Habesha, or Africans versus non-Africans who are telling stories. And as much as I know we're in an era of authenticity, and I think that it should be driven from the people of the culture. But I did want to comment, by the way, on that, Habesha versus non-Habesha, echoing a little bit of what Mehret was saying. Right now, in this current state, we don't have the luxury of excluding each other. If an Ethiopian from Texas wants to tell a story about something going on in Ethiopia, let's get together. Obviously partner with people who know what we're talking about, but in an ideal state, we will be able to do those kind of exclusions, but right now we need to come together because there's strength in numbers. And my point about the stories, I think, just to give you kind of like my final thought on this, is I think the ideal state for any story is just like World War II, that there's like 100 stories and you can watch all of them, and through them you can kind of get to the truth. Maybe this one has a little bit of, this part, this one talks about this, what happened in this country. By the time you've seen all of it, that's when you're in a better place. It's like, and that's what I invite. I would love nothing more than, coming out with these stories from Ethiopian history and then having others do it, and then you do it. And then, by the time you have this whole canvas, you can see a clear picture and get to the truth like that.
Okay, so carrying on with our topic of carrying the torch, how do we carry on the essence of traditional Ethiopian storytelling over storytelling that continues negative perceptions of Africans perpetuated by Western media?
We need a manifesto. I think we need to, I don't know, it could be your own personal manifesto, but I think even as a community of creators or storytellers, because it's not just film, there's music, there's different art, there's books, there's design. But I think we need to really sit and think about what are the pillars that we're trying to hit, and when it comes to storytelling, what's going to make the Ethiopian and Eritrean narratives I don't know. I just think we need some sort of guidance because we don't have an infrastructure in filmmaking like the West does. Not saying we need it, but we should have some sort of manifesto or guideline so that we hold ourselves accountable to the truth and to honesty, respect as well, and also just being open-minded. I don't know. The list can go on, but I think that's a good start. And it just kind of gives us something to kind of achieve. It may even give you constraints, and I always think constraints are the best way of really challenging your creativity. But if it's not written out and laid out and followed and shared amongst the community, then we might kind of fall in the same trap of telling inaccurate stories or not taking into consideration another perspective. I know a lot of Habesha things, whether it's a YouTube channel, a YouTube commentary, whatever it may be, is very one-sided. So I think we need to hold ourselves accountable, and I say we could start with the manifesto.
Yeah, I think that's great. I also think just by us getting more and more ingrained in these systems, we then have more power. Like you working for Beyonce, and then I work for whatever, these different TV writers and whatever. We just have these connects, because if you look at the things that are made by Hollywood, that are set in the country, it's not from our. Has anyone seen that movie Red Sea Divers or heard about it? Yeah, it's like they cast the dude from I Am the Captain Now as a Habesha. And it's like, you couldn't find anyone, because they don't, it's their perspective, which is fine, because they don't care. So it's like, it's a story from the perspective of people who want to tell the narrative of they needed to escape and come to Israel so they could be safe. And I mean, the movie speaks for itself. And it's because it's not made by people who care about telling our narrative. But the more that we get ingrained in these systems, I have, like, just from me writing for shows, now I know producers that are like, I want to tell the story of a dude who goes back to Ethiopia after he fails in America and he's trying to make it in entertainment there. And but they've never heard anyone pitch that to them. And they never knew anyone like me because we didn't know we could do this. So it's literally just us being in these positions, I think, will lead to those things happening. It just hasn't happened because we're the first class,
I also think that, like, as we talk about developing a canon of, like, Habesha film or films from our perspectives as a community, like, I like what you're saying about how, like, we need to build an infrastructure. It doesn't need to be what the West has. It doesn't need to be Hollywood. Because I also think that, like, there's danger in setting up criteria for what we are looking for from our community in a way that aligns just like the West. Because, like, okay, so we keep talking about, like, World War II as this analogy of, like, this piece of history that we just can't stop talking about, which is, like, probably a good thing to a degree. But something that I've talked about with a lot of my Jewish friends is that, like, they feel a frustration that they're like, this is the only piece of Jewish history that anybody knows about that isn't Jewish. Like, there's so much else that, like, so all of us who have no ties to, like, a very specific story about World War II have so much knowledge about it, and they feel that they have this wealth and this depth of other stories to tell, and I think that even though we're not in the same position, we don't have a canon of films about the Derg or the monarchy yet, and I think that we deserve that and could benefit from that, but I also think that we can't just look at, like, the canon of World War II films and be like, we need that, and we need to tell Ethiopian stories, and that means only talking about our wars. Like, there's this beautiful film that played at Sundance 2021, I think, from this filmmaker, Jessica Bashir, called Feyade. And she made it over the course of 10 or so years, going back to the village that, like, I don't think she grew up there, I think one of her parents grew up there, she was visiting over a course of, like, 10 years, would go every year, every other year. It kind of started with her just trying to, like, document stuff as her grandmother was passing away, and she just wanted to have memories to hold on to. It wasn't meant to be a film. And then as she started to build a community there, and, like, learned what the commerce of that community was set up like, she started learning about this plant called chat that is, like, a stimulant that's native to Ethiopia that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. But it was really interesting. She made this film that kind of spanned centuries going back into the history of like Sufi Muslims in the highlands of Ethiopia who like had these spiritual traditions around and then followed the trajectory, used that as a through line to then talk about, because it's like the number one export of Ethiopia, even though it's not in Addis, it's not in like the cities of Ethiopia that people outside of Ethiopia think about, but the highlands are so dependent upon it that it's Ethiopia's number one export. So she told this really intense and intricate story that was so specific, of all kinds of different Ethiopian stories that I had no idea about because they're not the Ethiopian cultures that my parents are from. And I think that like there's so much that we're not even looking for. Like we don't even know what to look for yet. I think there's so much strength and specificity, and we can't just look for the one thing. Like, yes, I want a million different stories and takes on the monarchy and why all of our parents came to America. But I want so much more that I haven't even thought to ask for yet.
Can I add one comment and a question? Because that what you just said touches on exactly what I was going to ask. Is I'm Biniam, by the way. My question is culture and history. I think culture. A lot of us, when we think of it as history. That's the first thing that comes to us. And and you also asked about carrying the torch. The first stories that I learned is like my dad telling me how he got from Tigray or whatever to Addis, and that's the story. That's the base of where we get who we're from. And so my first question is if there's anybody in your family, uncle, aunt, dad, whatever, who planted story, and if you remember what that feels like. And as a creative, the one thing that I'm kind of struggling with and trying to grow more into is translating what that is into what we translate as culture, identity, whatever we're doing now. And so for you, if you have any thoughts on what culture means now, because I feel like culture changes, it's not just history with everything that happens, culture does move, and so what is your relationship with the culture now? Because I think a lot of what people are saying, American versus Habesha from Ethiopia, whatever, that's like that hesitance, I feel like is not maybe knowing the history or being afraid to misrepresent the history or whatever, but as a contemporary Ethiopian Americans, how do you relate to the audience? How do you relate to those stories that your parents told you and you're trying to reinterpret them into something new? What is that challenge and how do you kind of approach that?
I mean, the stories that my dad would tell me about, like, he lived in Harar, and then he had to like go to school in Aspetifuri. That was like, when he was like 7, 8 years old by himself, just so he can continue schooling. And these stories to me are timeless and also relatable to people that aren't Ethiopian too. Like that, like if I can watch, I don't know if you've seen like RRR, this Indian movie that came out. If I could watch that and be like, this is a great, like, why couldn't people watch that and feel as though it's just timeless to them? So I guess it is, I don't really think about trying to make it be cultural in that it's like, how do I please the Ethiopians, but more like, how do I make this a good story with the elements that will make it entertaining, and just through making it specific by knowing the details, hopefully that also makes it cultural, I don't know if that answers the question.
Is the audience a big aspect of?
I find whenever I've been making something, I'm thinking too much about the audience, it makes the thing bad. So I feel like then you're like, oh, well, they like this, I should take this, and you're not thinking about the actual narrative itself, you're not thinking about the characters, you're thinking about some reaction that doesn't even exist yet because your thing's not even out in the world. And so obviously you have to be cognizant of it, but I wouldn't lead with that,
I actually wanted to interject because earlier, sorry, I don't want to jump in. Earlier, sometimes I like to refer to myself as like a watered down version of Biniam because some of the things that he's barely accomplished in comedy or writing or things of that nature, those are the things that I like to aspire to. So like earlier with what you're talking about with breaking the status quo, like that's how I think that it's done normally and like really, really efficiently as well. where somebody that looks very similar to you does the thing that you wanted to accomplish, and then now it's way more attainable to you than ever before, right? I just want to touch on a brief story where there was like a runner, and then there's like I think it's like a 2-hour marathon or something like this, and nobody thought that you could do a sub 2-hour marathon, right? And then one time, this one runner breaks that marathon, and then now the next time they had that same marathon, there was like 30 more people that were able to do it sub that 2 hours, meaning that they were able to see one person accomplish it. Now that inspires in them the idea that they could accomplish it as well. So that being said, my question to the panel is, how do you accomplish those feats without already having somebody to kind of refer to or somebody to see in that position as well? So you haven't seen that representation per se, and now you're having to kind of pioneer that journey, right? And so how do you guys kind of approach that? That's my question.
I think I would be lying if I said I didn't see someone in that position, or at least in the industry. It may not have been a lot of people, but I think I was like 13 when it was so funny. It was on MySpace. I was on Carrie Hilson's MySpace, and on her top 8 was someone named Ethiopia, like on her top 8. So I'm like, who does Carrie Hilson know that's Ethiopian, and her name is Ethiopia? I was just like very intrigued by it. And I just remember doing a whole bunch of research and finding out she works at a music label. I've always wanted to work in music. I didn't know it would end up in like the music, on the production side of music or the creative direction side of like an artist's work, but that was probably the first Ethiopian I've seen in an industry that I had interest in. So again, one person, but I knew if she was able to do it, that maybe there's hope. Mm-hmm. Takes a lot of risk, but I think now that I'm in it, or now that we're all in it, I do see a lot more Habeshas, and I think it's great. I think it's something that younger generations can look forward to. But I think I don't know, I've always had someone to look towards as a goal or as like an accomplishment factor.
Yeah, I feel like you take what you can get, like as far as representation and mentorship. There are a few like Habesha journalists who I definitely look up to. There's this woman, Hanna Giorgis, at The Atlantic, who I've been reading since I was in like high school, since before I realized that this is what I wanted to do. She was just somebody that I read, and that was really valuable, just kind of seeing that name in stuff that I realized that I wanted to do. But I think also, Yoel, I think you were saying something about like we don't have the luxury to exclude each other. I think that like I don't limit my role models to just being Habesha, because if I did, I would never get anything done. I feel like, and like, I mean, I don't know, maybe that's sad, but like it's also just kind of like where we're at, like as a culture, especially all of us are working in American industries. As a culture, there hasn't been a history of Habeshas being in America as long as there have been a lot of other places, people from other countries. And so I feel like I looked up a lot to, like, okay, I mean, this show really fell off, and we don't have to talk about everything attached to it, but like Master of None was really big for me when that came with the first season, when it first came out. Because it was like, oh, this is a show that's like, it's a cool, like, edgy, prestige streaming comedy about a first-generation story that I really relate to. It was about Indians. It's not a culture that I'm from, but a lot of it made sense to me. It was very legible to me. And I think that, like, and I look back at, like, who I grew up with, all of my friends at school that were at Habesha, like, all of them were first-gen. I didn't realize it when I was, like, 5 making friends, but it was, like, I found myself gravitating to first-gen people. So I think you just, like, you find the people that you can identify with beyond just those lines of being Ethiopian, being Eritrean, being African. You just kind of, you take what you can get and put yourself there when you can get there. I mean, like, I would love for our kids to be able to have an Habesha in every industry to look up to and model their paths after, but I don't think you can wait for that.
Yeah, absolutely agree with both of you. You know, hopefully you find someone who's a mentor who's Habesha, and that's great. But if not, the next best thing is maybe something that you share in common with that person. Maybe it's a young black man doing, what you're doing in the industry, or someone who went to your school, or someone who has your background. Oh, I started in this industry and now I'm made into film. They can be your mentor in your kind of role. I know that, for instance, what we're doing specifically as a Ethiopian producer, there are people like Mehret, who I got very much inspired by. She's a close family friend too, so look up to her, what she's doing, and her husband, who is a lawyer turned filmmaker, so I feel very inspired by that too. But I know in law school, for instance, a lot of us who were thinking about getting into entertainment, we look up to people like Charles King, or some even actors who are from Howard. So you can always find a point in common, especially in the entertainment industry, since I think we're just kind of arriving and kind of in numbers now. And this is what's so great about an organization like Hollywood is Habesha, is that we can start to network and see that, actually there's plenty others who are doing what I'm doing, and we can stick together. So if you don't find the exact person who's like an older version of you, just find the next best thing and some point of common with that person.
Yeah, just to add to that, I'll say it's important to realize how you're being perceived from the outside, because when I get hired on these shows, they're not hiring me as an Ethiopian American. They're hiring me as diverse man, black man, So I'm black. I'm just black to these white people, and I am black. But it's like they're not thinking of it as specific as we are. So I was always inspired by Donald Glover, Aziz, fucking. The Kid Cudi. It was more about what are you doing on a soul level that connects with my soul? Do I relate to what you're doing more so than are you from the exact same country? Because I was I know that, to the cops we all look the same or whatever, that kind of thing. It's they're not drawing these distinctions, so why am I gonna separate myself from these people who look just like me?
I will say though, back to when I saw that there was this Ethiopian woman named Ethiopia in the music industry, the one thing that it did for me though was I was able to show my mom and my parents who were not really understanding what it was that I want to do, and I'm but look, there's an Ethiopian, a girl who works in music, so I could do it. I don't have to be a doctor. I don't have to. And of course, it was nah, what do you? They didn't understand it. So I think for me, it wasn't more so about seeing someone in the industry that I want to. Now I know I can do it. It was more about can I really do it?
Yeah.
I know there's a way, but if I don't have the support from my family, or am I that different? I don't know. I really do think there was a little bit of doubt. Although I was always willing to try and do whatever, there was still that I'm the oldest in the family. Am I really about to take this risk? And does it make sense? Am I just naive? I don't know. Sometimes as a first generation, you kind of sometimes feel like an immigrant because, I don't know, you may think you're a little different because at home you were raised differently than your friends who were born here too. I don't know. So I think seeing, just that one Ethiopian that was a woman who also works in the industry, somehow she convinced her parents, so I'm gonna continue to try and convince my parents that this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
That's true.
I mean, same with The Weeknd, right? I showed my parents him, and they were like, "What the hell is he talking about?" But I was like, "But look, it's on MTV though." So.
Super Bowl. Okay. Last question. We got to wrap up soon, so make you the last one.
Thank you for allowing me to be the last. My name is Makonnen, and I was cousin. I know the majority of you guys up here on stage. And my question is a little different than the questions that have been asked previously. But I'm a part of a nonprofit organization called the Makonnen Asylum Project. So what we are doing in this time is we're working to build a library about an hour outside of Addis in a really desolate area, kids that walk miles and miles to get to a really rough school, and within the next year we're building a clinic. So my question is how do I, as an Ethiopian living in America, reach out and connect with the diaspora to, get donations, to reach out to people that want to get dirty and get on the ground and work with us over in Ethiopia and help build the library and the clinic and things like that. Like, how do I leverage my connections and the people that I know, like you guys, to make those dreams come true?
I don't really hear a lot about these things. I wish I knew more about these type of projects, and I think well, I shouldn't speak for everyone, but I'm always looking forward to the day that I can go back and do something, and more from a creative or artful approach, just because that's what I know, I guess. But I think just tapping in and asking like this, at least for me, it just made me interested, so.
Yeah, I think it's just as simple as asking sometimes. But, you know, that's something that I've been mindful as well. I'm not really hip to a lot of these organizations, but, you know, running 2591 worldwide and something that would announce soon, you know, using some of the proceeds of that to give back into the community is something that I want to do. So, you know, just bringing it to people's attention, and, you know, we can create initiatives and find ways to incorporate it in what we do.
And then I'll just add this. I think it's really important to attach any kind of work that you're trying to do, especially like community work, to your wheelhouse, right? So like one thing you didn't mention is that you're also an actress, you're also a model, and you've also gotten a lot of big jobs, and you have quite a following on Instagram. And I think that like connecting those dots and making sure that people know that that's a part of your work and what you do, and like what Dinkanish said, like connecting 2591 to community work, or like, you know, Dinkanish and I run our own things, like, you know, not obviously, some of you guys know my work as a designer with St. Yared, some of you don't, but St. Yared is connected to Hollywood is Habesha, right? So I just think that like making sure that you're connecting all of those things, so when people find you or people know you in these places, they can also say, hey, I can go support this, or things like that. Because I think all of us, like everybody in this room knows somebody or has family back home that needs help. And a lot of our motivation, I mean, I don't want to assume and speak for everybody, but a lot of my motivation, and I know your motivation, and a lot of people up here, are want to go back and help out, like just what Leah said, like, and figuring out how to connect that to your wheelhouse, where like I can't necessarily get dirty right now and like dig up a bunch of things, but I can design a lot of things. I can do a lot of graphic design. All right, so now I got a job.
You're doing it for free.
For real though.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're gonna wrap up. We're gonna go to the last topic of distribution and funding. We're just gonna ask one question and make it really, really quick. So how can we make our own stories without relying on studios to put out our stories? I know we touched on it in many different ways, but just like a quick recap on that.
So I'll start because I wanted to also mention, I did actually get the good fortune to see the documentary of Haile Gerima. I've been visiting him in his cave, and definitely got through about 2.5 hours of a long documentary. But I wanted to kind of caveat, and this is my experience of talking to him, is that I don't think he was anti-Hollywood to begin with. I think he became like that after working with people here and understanding the frustrations of, you know, needing the funding and needing the studio to come in and then them having a say, and their say is usually not someone who has the perspective of the lived story will have a more authentic one, and they want to revert to stereotypes. So I think that's why he went the independent route. And I respect that. I think it's a matter of choice. But I was going to say that Hollywood is still the #1 purveyor of image around the world. It's the #1 place for storytelling that's going to be broadcast around the world. So I think that if you want to work outside of the Hollywood stream, that's great. But you were talking about, for instance, Teza, which is a very important film about the Derg. But you said nobody saw it. It was not there. Why? You're outside of the Hollywood system. There's some trade-offs. So I'm not saying pick one or the other, but definitely for me, I know that a big focus is to work through Hollywood because this is the platform to broadcast your story to the world. And they're the ones with the biggest funding to reach the kind of projects creatively and strategically that you want to do at that level. The independent route is very I respect it a lot too, and it just gives you more control. But then you might be missing out on getting it in front of as many people as you want. So I think you just have to find what works for you and go through the system that will work the best for you.
Yeah, to add to that, I'd say it's like the thing of like how do we do it outside of the Hollywood system is based on maybe some idea of lack, like they won't let us or something. But I think they will. They just don't know. So like, if you're lucky enough to work within the systems of, like, I'll just speak about me, like writing for other people's shows and then getting to know these producers, whatever, people know you from things you've made or written. They want to know, well, what do you want to do? And if you pitch them something they've never heard and they're like, wow, like, we could do that there. That hasn't been done. They get excited and they want to do it. They just, I think now is the time where it's, and they're not doing it out of charity. You know, we're saying these things of like, what can we do to go back and help out? I think even changing that narrative is like, what can we do to go back and profit? We could like this shit is actually, it's the most untapped market. So it's like, we don't even need to look at it as this like, they'll help us, please. It's like, they want it, you know? And that my path, at least, to get things out there is just using the connections I've made through the jobs I've had and, you know, putting together the skills to make something seem alluring to people who have the money. But, you know, if you don't want to do that, you got YouTube, you got Vimeo. But often the path from those things goes back towards studio. You want to make a short film, you take it to a festival, what are you trying to get? Distribution. So that's Hollywood. So it's like, you could do that too, but it often ends up with trying to get Hollywood. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much, all of you, on this incredible panel. I hope all of you took some incredible gems from this conversation. We're going to wrap it up here. Yeah, so we have a few announcements, actually, and then we're going to let you break off and get to talk with people on the panel and get to meet each other. And hopefully this results in some creative projects and some great things in the future, just off these relationships. So we're going to go to the announcements. So we talked a lot about distribution and creating stories ourselves and everything that you guys heard. So a solution provided by myself under 2591 Worldwide, and what I need a lot of assistance with from everyone is Kitzvah, which is a streaming platform for all original diaspora content. It's called Kitzvah, raw and good content. We're not talking blockbuster productions or anything like that, but us using the resources that we have with people like us in the room and making productions together. So that's that. If you guys, like I said, I can't do this alone. So we've had several people send in submissions of short films, but we definitely need a much larger Rolodex of, you know, series, episodes, documentaries, short films, feature films, anything. So if any of you guys are creators and have anything in the works or anything completed, if you go to the website, kitzvo.tv, there's a place for submissions, and you guys can also join the wait list for when it launches and stay up to date on that. Second announcement is Ikub. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with the concept. It's nothing new. It's an indigenous practice, mutual aid fund of pulling together, basically, you know, getting members to join a group, and every month people contribute dues, and every month the money pool that's collected goes to a different person on a rotational basis. And we're taking that same concept, but we're using it towards creatives. So every month we're funding a different creative project. So if you have a short film you want to put out, an album you want to put out, you want to curate an art gallery or anything like that, it's going to be a rotational fund, which will be a mobile app. So if you guys go to the website, ikub.io, you guys can join the wait list and wait for updates on that. And our last announcement, I will let Dagmawi and introduce this from the Habesha Film Association on their website launch, or I can do it. Okay, well, it's basically the video that's showing you their website. It's an opportunity for people to come together and network virtually. They have rooms where you can discuss and meet other people. You get to select what your role is if you're a director or a cinematographer, and so on. And you get to meet and connect with other Habeshas in the industry. So go to their websites at hfa.media, create a profile, and meet others. And